Hey, I'm your host, Mari Wagner, and you're listening to the Be podcast, where faith meets lifestyle. I'm so excited you're here. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime follower, I know there's something here for you. Pull up a chair and listen in for insightful, real-life conversations and actionable steps on how to claim the full life God created you for. If you're a woman desiring to live a Christ-centered life in today's modern world, then this is for you. Welcome to Be. Hi, Trey. We're back, you and me, on another episode of Be.
Yes, we are excited to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about marriage, specifically some of the biggest lessons that we've learned in our 3 years of marriage.
Yep, 3 years already. I can't believe it.
I know, it's actually gone by so fast. So, disclaimer, okay? We're only 3 years in.
We are still newlyweds.
We still consider this newlyweds. I actually think, I don't know if it's factually or statistically, it's you're technically a newlywed, I think, until 5 years of
It
marriage.
could even be 10 years, honestly.
Maybe. I guess, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, when you're married for, I don't know, 60 years, 10 years is really soon into that timeline.
And
So
second disclaimer, we do not have children.
yes.
So anything we share on this will be
from our
without
experience.
the perspective of children.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is our experience. And even though we've been married for only 3 years, we've learned a lot of things along the way.
Yeah. And I think that we also we're really blessed to receive a really unique and beautiful formation, especially in our engagement in our early years of marriage, when we were serving as missionaries with Focus, because as a missionary, you have a lot of formation that goes into your training to be a missionary.
A lot of top-notch formation.
Yes, exactly. We're learning from top theologians in the Catholic world and speakers and amazing examples of holy men and women who are striving to be saints through their vocation of being a wife and a husband.
Yeah, both in the context of our vocation of marriage, but also just in being a human formation with virtue training and training on the Catholic Church's theology on what man and woman is, and just overall human formation as well.
Theology of the body.
Yeah, and all the virtue training that we received. It's been a very fun, informative journey.
Yeah, it was such a blessing. And I know that in many conversations that I've had with college students who are discerning to be a Focus missionary, if they're kind of on the fence, one thing Trey and I always say is that, at the very least, it is such good training for the vocation of marriage.
And for being a Christian.
And well, for sure for being a Christian. But in a sense where you wouldn't think, as a very baseline reason to apply to be a missionary, obviously there's so many reasons to apply, but a very baseline reason is it helps you be such a good Catholic, which therefore trains you so well to strive to be a good wife and husband in your marriage.
Absolutely.
So we'll just say that, what we share, maybe the grace of God has given us this wisdom, but a lot of it has just been things that we have learned from many other amazing holy men and women who have far more experience than us and are older than us and have beautiful families. And so with that, let's just kind of dive into our top lessons learned.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So we got married in 2021. Like I said, 3 years ago, we got married straight out of college. So we were babies when we got married. And one thing that I love about that is that we basically are growing into adulthood together.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make one marriage better than the other. You could get married at 27 and it'll be a beautiful marriage as well.
Or 35.
But we got married at 23.
Yeah, I think we were 23 and 22.
Yeah, 23 and 22, pretty soon out of college, and we learned how to start living adult life together. And one of the advantages that I have experienced in our kind of a young marriage scenario is that you're building your life together. And so it allowed us to kind of have this shared vision of what we wanted our future to be, kind of have this shared vision of how to build our family, practices that we're going to have in our adult life. And I feel like that set a beautiful foundation for us to kind of always view our relationship as a team, which we'll get
Hmm.
into as one of the things that we've learned. But we always kind of have this like beautiful like team aspect to everything we approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge encouragement for all you young people out there. Get married young. It's amazing.
Yes, 100%. If the Lord is calling you to get married young, do not hesitate. It's been so
And
fun.
you can build your life together. And as Catholics, the way we look at marriage is a truly a vocation. And so what that means is it's the way that God has called us to get to heaven. That's ultimately our path to heaven. And so the way that we look at marriage and the way that we're going to be discussing it here on this podcast is through this Catholic lens of how we can ultimately get to heaven, because that is our ultimate destination, and how marriage, the joys and the trials and the struggles and the sufferings ultimately are what lead us to heaven.
Yeah. So from the beginning of our relationship and our marriage, our goal has always been to have a foundation of like a God-centered relationship. And I think we set a lot of those, foundational stones like in your dating relationship, and that's super important in dating and engagement to have that be your focus. You can translate that into marriage, but even continuing into marriage, I feel like that's the lens that like we're going to be talking about all our like tips and everything
Mhm.
we've learned through how it's all how we view our marriage and how we view loving each other well through this lens of putting God at the center first. And what does a God-centered marriage look like? And if God is in the center of our marriage, it all really has to start with God being the center of our individual lives. And like our relationship with God has to be solid in order for us to be able to pour in a, trying to, pour holy love into each other has to come from a place of a strong relationship with God. So, what we feel like is the key to a God centered marriage are really focusing on three different like virtues. And that's faith, love, and sacrifice. So, faith, like I just said, really the idea that to have a strong God centered marriage, you have to have a strong relationship with God yourself and make sure that your relationship with each other is being constantly rooted in faith and in God.
Yeah, it's about putting first things first.
Mhm.
We first need to have our own house in order. We need to have a personal living faith with Jesus Christ. And then from that relationship, we can better and more effectively pour into our own marriage.
And I think beyond that too, it's also about rooting your marriage in the church and like
Absolutely. Yeah.
in your faith, like in the Catholic faith. The Catholic faith has so many beautiful and rich teachings on marriage, on family life. And so really taking the time to learn about that, to study that, to kind of draw from this wellspring of knowledge to be able to form ourselves in some way to know like how to be a good Catholic wife, how to be a good Catholic husband. Because the reality is, not everybody and most people aren't going to have an opportunity like maybe we did, or people that are actively in ministry or in, or like as a missionary in their life and their career. Like they might not have those opportunities of formation. Like most people are in the working world, in the corporate world, out like trying to be in the world, but not of it. And so trying to draw knowledge and inspiration from teachings of the church on, like Trey was saying, like just personal human formation of like how to be a good Christian, how to grow in virtue yourself, and teachings of marriage and family life that the church offers us as well to teach us specifically how to be a good wife and how to be a good husband.
Yes, 100% agree.
Okay, next is love, and essentially like the truest meaning of love that we have learned
Mhm.
is willing the good of the other. I feel like you're
Yeah.
really good at talking.
So this means ultimately, like Mari just said, willing the good of the other, putting the other above yourself. So if you're the man, putting your wife's needs above your own, and finding ways to lay down your own life and sacrifice your own wants, desires, feelings for the good of your wife, so that she can be taken care of, she can be nourished, she can be protected, she can be provided for, but also having that be a mutual respect from the wife, and having the wife also simultaneously laying down her desires, sacrificing her wants and her needs for the good of her husband or for her family. And that is, I mean, obviously everybody knows like love is the foundation of marriage, but love is not reduced to a feeling or an
Mhm.
emotional bond you may have with your significant other, but it is the choice and it's an action of the will to actually will the good of the other, even if you don't feel like it. And so that's something that like is only gonna get harder as we progress in our married years, but we've already seen the challenges of in our just day-to-day life. And that is one of the ways and one of the reasons why vocation or why marriage is a vocation, because it challenges us daily to lay down our lives, to will the good of the other, even when we don't feel like it.
Right. Like you said, marriage is a vocation, and vocation, like a vocation, is supposed to sanctify us.
Yes.
And sanctification, I mean, Jesus never said sanctification was easy, right? We talked about this morning. Like,
Yeah.
getting to heaven isn't easy.
Yes.
And
Pick up your cross and follow me.
exactly. And so I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind, and one thing that I think our popular culture, like worldly culture, forgets. I guess it's not really in their innate culture to lean into sacrifice, but luckily our Catholic Church shows us the beauty in that. But I think that that's something that people forget in marriage, and maybe one of the reasons why divorce rates are so high, or marriage, you know, is such a difficult vocation, is because we forget that with vocation comes sacrifice. And like you said, your vocation and sanctification is pick up your cross and follow me. And so you're going to encounter suffering. You're going to encounter sacrifice. You're going to have to lose yourself, die to yourself, and actively choose someone else. And so, you hear the phrases like, oh, like we just fell out of love. And that kind of mindset shows that you're reducing love to a feeling. Like Trey was saying, like that's not true love, reducing it to the butterflies and rainbows. And while that feeling of love is so good, and I mean, it doesn't go away in marriage. It's not like you just stop loving each other, but you don't have this consistent high every single day for years and years and years. So true love, choosing the good of the other, like willing the good of the other, really comes down to, how do I put my needs aside? How do I choose what is good for my husband? What is good for our marriage, for our family, over what maybe I selfishly want in this moment, And if it's hard, how can I choose what is hard over what is just easy?
Yeah, and this leads right into that third virtue that we're going to talk about, which is sacrifice.
Yeah.
And they go hand in hand, because you can't have love without sacrifice. Jesus shows us that most beautifully with his testimony, his witness, especially on the cross. And that was one of the hardest lessons that I learned in my first year of marriage. And I don't think it's uncommon, but just how much you have to die to yourself. I think that was by far and away the hardest lesson that I'm still learning and still struggling through. But thankfully, by the grace of God, I've grown in a little bit in the past 3 years. But that first year especially was learning to die to yourself and just put you, my beloved, above myself. And that's hard. But that's good. It's what I need. And I think that's what most people need through their vocation, is to learn how to sacrifice and put the needs of another above yourself.
Yeah, I think also sacrifice can be lived out in so many different ways within marriage. And the full spectrum is important. I think maybe those first 5 years of marriage, at least from my conversations with girlfriends who are newly married, and, books that we've read, kind of are some of the hardest for those bigger ones. Like you were saying, kind of really losing your old self, and dying to your old single self, like what you were used to, and just, being in charge and in control and having a say of your own life, and not, having anybody impact those decisions, is one thing. Or, maybe even changing your schedule and giving of your time more with another person, and spending less time with friends or going out, or whatever that is.
Or even just choosing what to eat that day, or where to go out to eat, or what to cook for dinner. Those are just daily, minute decisions that now you are no longer 1000% in control of.
Right. Yeah. And then it leads us to those little sacrifices too, of just oh, I'm super tired today, but I'm going to choose to do the dishes so my husband doesn't have to do them. Or, you know, Mari has to spend more time getting ready this morning, so I'm going to make her breakfast, because if I don't, she's going to be a hangry person. And I'm going to
Yes.
choose to do that instead of start work or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
it even goes down to those little things which start coming more naturally when you start thinking of the other person more or thinking of them even more than yourself and what you might want in that moment. Even those little sacrifices, I think, go a long way and get easier too over time.
Yeah, I think I've talked to friends about this, about the beautiful ordering in which we're called to live, whereas it's first marriage and you learn how to sacrifice and you learn how to put the needs of another ahead of your own
Mhm.
and to learn to like make these daily sacrifices or deaths to self so that then once kids come, it'll be an even further stretching, but you at least have some preparation and some practice as opposed to having it in the reverse where all of a sudden you have a child and they're dependent on you for every single need and you haven't had any practice in that. So it's a very
Mhm.
beautiful ordering that the church gives us by saying marriage first, then children.
Mhm.
And we just hope that like while we're in these years before children, that we are forming ourselves and we're practicing these sacrifices in this way of life that we're learning how to live now together so that we can better love our family as we do
Mhm.
have kids.
Yeah. Okay. So this sets really like a solid foundation for how to have a God centered marriage. And if you only listen up to this point, I think you got some really valuable information out of that.
Faith, love, and sacrifice.
Yeah. But now we're going to go into a few other like practical things and just specific experiences that we had in our first 3 years of marriage. And I think right off the bat in our first year, we kept running into this idea of like marriage is hard. Like throughout our engagement, we heard a lot of people talk about how, oh, wow, marriage is so hard. It's so beautiful, but it's so hard. And I think at first it kind of bothered us to hear that. And I think it's good to share that in, like, a healthy amount, but not, like, overdo it when you're talking to an engaged person because in the end, like, they're so excited to get married, so that's a no on that. But we heard, like, marriage is hard," and our first few months of marriage were really, really beautiful, and we were like, "What are you talking about? Like, marriage is so easy, like, marriage is so fun, like, I don't know why people say marriage is hard." But I think pretty soon into that first year of marriage, we couldn't really put our finger on it yet, but at some point we kind of realized like a point of tension that we were having was came down to love languages and how we each received and gave love. And that was kind of a difficulty that we had in that first year that made us realize like, oh, maybe this is one of the reasons why marriage is hard.
Yeah, I just felt like we just kept missing each other. Like we kept trying to love the other person well, but it was never being received, or we each individually felt like the other person wasn't doing a good job loving us, and we just kept missing each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember us having, like, a few different conversations where either you or I were sitting down with the other person, we're like, "I, like, need more of this." Like, I not that I didn't think you loved me, but it was like, "I don't feel loved." Like, "I need these things to feel loved." And you were like, "Well, I don't feel very loved." Like, "I need these things to feel loved." And it was always like it was kind of hard conversations because the other person, I mean, all you want is to love your spouse. All you want is for them to feel loved. And so when you hear this, like, "Yeah, I don't really feel loved by you lately," it's like, "Oh my gosh," like, I remember feeling like, "I'm just trying my best out here to love," like, how could you not feel loved? And I think the same way if I was like, "I don't feel loved," and you were like, "Literally, I'm doing so much for you," like, how could you not feel loved? And I think after a few of these conversations, we really sat down to be like, "Okay, why exactly do we keep missing each other? Why do we keep feeling like we're loving each other as best we can and it's like not being received?" And we really boiled it down to love languages, which we had talked about throughout our dating. But I think when it really came down to everyday moments in marriage, you naturally revert back to what is easiest to you. And in our experience, what's easiest to you is the way you receive love best, because obviously that's what makes you feel the most loved. And so usually that's what you're most inclined to give.
Yeah, you're like, oh, well, if this makes me feel loved, then I'll do this to my spouse because
Mhm.
it will make them feel loved. I mean, it's obvious why we would do that.
Exactly. And so for me, my top love language, also, if you haven't heard of love languages, just do a quick Google search. It's super valuable and super important, I think, especially in like a romantic relationship, a serious relationship, to learn what your love language is. It's basically how you best feel loved, how you best receive and give love. Um, and so mine is physical touch. That's like my top one. And Trey's top one is acts of service. And so for me, for someone who has physical touch as their top love language, the way I'm going to feel the most loved is like a hug or Trey holding my hand or a kiss or even
Just like putting down what I'm doing and going sitting on the couch with you and cuddling up with you.
yes, exactly. And so I think my second one might be quality time too. And so sometimes those kind of go hand in hand because you have to like stop what you're doing. But also, it can be something as simple as like we're just walking by and he'll just like brush my shoulder, or like
Or the back rubs in bed.
I love back rubs. Back rubs are the best. I've talked about this with other girlfriends who are married and are also physical touch as like their top love language. And literally, it's hilarious. Even as simple as like I have to be touching him at all times. Like if we're just on the couch and we're like not fully cuddling, like my feet will like be under his leg or something
Yeah,
because
or
I
we'll
just
just
like
be
want to
sitting
touch it.
or we'll just be sitting at a desk or like at a coffee shop and I'll just feel your feet creeping up on me.
I'm just like, I'm not trying to play footsie. I just like want to touch you. And so that's how I feel the most loved. Trey, how do you feel the most loved?
I feel the most loved with acts of service. The things that would make me feel the most loved is if I had a long day and I'm tired, Mari doing the dishes at the end of the meal, or if she would do the laundry and then like actually fold it and put it away in my closet so that I don't have to fold because I hate folding, or going out of her way to run an errand to pick something up from the store that I wouldn't have to do that. So like those are just simple ways that would make me feel loved much more than a little hug. Like,
Mhm.
not that that doesn't make me feel loved, but it wouldn't fill my heart as much
Mhm.
as Mari actually doing some sort of service-oriented action
Mhm.
so that then I wouldn't need to do it.
Yeah, I think even as something as simple as like, will you're on the couch, you're like, oh, my phone's dead. Like, could you grab a charger? And like,
Mhm.
just the act of like getting off the couch, because that sucks for
Yeah.
everybody. When you're comfy on the couch, like you don't want to get off. Like, even that kind of, that's something that I learned that like makes you feel loved. It's like when you go out of your way to like just kind of break the comfortability you're in, that's like a little sacrifice, in a small way that you
Yeah,
can just show, like, yeah, I'll get up and do this for you.
totally.
And so what we experienced was we were trying to love each other in these ways, right? Like I would like smother Trey with hugs and kisses all day to be like, oh my gosh, I love you so much. Like just to show him all this love that I had. And Trey was like serving in every way that he could, like getting up early in the morning and like making breakfast or like making sure that like dishes were clean at the end of the night, even if we're tired, or like the countless times that I forget my water when I'm in bed and he gets up and fills up water, or when I'm on the couch and I need something. Like he would always do these things. And yet we would have these conversations where we were like, I don't really feel fully loved by you. And so we started talking about it and we started realizing like from my perspective, like, oh my gosh,
How could you not feel loved? I'm kissing you all day long.
yes, exactly.
And then on the flip side, I'm telling Mari, like, how do you not feel loved? Like, I do all of these things for you.
Mhm.
But what it came down to for us was like, Mari would have much rather me not do the dishes and just sat on the couch and cuddled her. That would
Mhm.
have been so much more of an act of love for you that you would have received it in that way
Mhm.
than being like, oh, well, the dishes had to get done and you just did them. So thanks, I guess. But like, I really wanted you on the couch with me.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Or even something as small as like in the middle of the day, you just come and like give me a hug. You know what I mean? Just like, or we're out in public and you just like hold my hand, like something like that. And so I remember in these conversations, I would be like, well, I really appreciate, like, I always appreciated when you did these things. I appreciated when you did the dishes or some chore, or like went out of your way to make breakfast in the morning when I needed time to get ready. And in my head, it was just like, these are just things that need to happen, And because my heart isn't oriented to receive love in service, in acts of service as like the top form of love, I was just like, well, things are just getting done the way they need to get done. But for someone who's acts of service, this is like those little sacrifices and the way you're serving the other person is how you were showing like, I love you and I want to show you
Yeah,
that
like,
and I want to serve
now you
you.
don't have to do that. It had to get done, but now you don't have to do it. And you could
Exactly.
just sit on the couch while I did it.
Exactly. And so I think the challenge for us, and also like it's a beautiful challenge, and I think that we've gotten better at it as time goes by and we'll only grow in it, I hope, is in moments when we feel like love for each other, at least I've noticed in my heart, like, oh, okay, like, I feel this like love for my husband. It kind of makes me stop a little bit. I'm like, okay, can I do something for him? Or when he asks something and I'm sitting on the couch, I'll think like, I don't want to do it, but this could be a moment where I could choose to love him. And so you start kind of being more cognizant of those times and choosing to flip the switch in your brain and be like, okay, let me just pause for a moment and be intentional about what would my spouse want in this moment? How would they feel the most loved?
Not how do I want to make them feel loved,
Hmm.
which is good, but going that step further, being like, okay, not just what do I want to do that's easy for me and comfortable
Yes,
for me and like
exactly.
what I want to do to make you feel loved, but what will my spouse want most right
Yeah.
now? Because if I have these desires to love my significant other, let's try to love them in the way that they will best receive it.
Hmm. And I think too, we've also come to an understanding of like, we now know the most natural way that we each desire to give love or the way that comes easiest. And we can still appreciate those gestures. Like,
Right.
we can still appreciate even more now when I see Trey doing an active service. I know he's really trying to love me and I can appreciate that more. Or Trey knows now that when I come give him a hug, he can appreciate that more.
Yeah, because that is you just desiring to share your love.
Exactly. Okay, the next big lesson I feel like we've learned is the fact that in order to have a beautiful, fun, loving, special relationship, you need to be intentional about that. You need to put the effort in to make it fun, loving, special, intentional relationship.
Yeah, a lot of times people might say, I know Maria said this to me, like, oh, it doesn't feel like we were like it was when we were dating.
Like the
And
honeymoon phase is over and people just kind of expect that to just be the case and it just to be like, "Oh, wow, well, you only get that in the beginning and now it's over."
yeah. And because of that, it was like when you're dating, you're trying to make things special. You're going out of your way. You're doing things that aren't the ordinary. You're not doing just the mundane things. But once you get married, like it's no longer fun date nights every time you see each other. I
Mhm.
mean, it's not fun vacations that you see if you're doing long distance. It's just the day in and day out grind of life.
Mhm.
And what we're about to talk about is how to make those that mundaneness of life and how to like keep a little bit of a spark and keep things special.
Yeah, I love what you said about how, like, when you're married, the only times you see each other isn't just the fun date nights, right? It's like now the time that you spend together is obviously like exponentially more than when you were dating. And now the moments you share, there's more like mundane moments than like fun, special moments. And so I think that's honestly maybe even just like a practical explanation of why people say like, oh, the honeymoon phase is over, is because the time you spend with each other isn't just like all these amazing date nights. Plus, when you're dating, I know one thing we've talked about before, like when you're dating, like you are making the intentional effort to like court the other person, to like woo the other person. And so you're trying to do special things. You're trying to make them fall in love with you in the best way possible, like you're trying to fall in love. And so it makes sense. And then when you're married, I think that because the more moments you share together are more of like your mundane everyday life moments, you might forget. It's easier to forget of like, I like still want to make this person like fall in love with me. Like I like want to continue falling in love. And so let's just talk about some like practical ways that we have found that have helped us just like keep a special kind of like spark in our relationship.
And so, one of the ways that we do this is through small intentional gifts and or letters. I know there's been times where I'm at the grocery store just picking up something we either forgot from our previous grocery run or I'm doing the grocery shopping myself that week
Mhm.
and I'll grab flowers for you or I'll see like a bar of chocolate at the candy stand checkout and I'll get that for you because you love
I
chocolate.
love chocolate
So,
and flowers. I mean, truth is, men, if you're listening to this, or women, play this episode again with your man so they can hear this. I feel like women are so easy. Like chocolate
they are
and
not.
flowers, like that is 101 basics
It
of
is
women.
101, but you can never make the claim women are easy.
Okay, fine. Women aren't easy, but flowers or chocolate will go such a long
Yes.
way. Or I love what you said about writing letters. I think that that's something that we've kind of tried to maintain throughout our relationship, like through dating. And a lot of it surged in dating because we were long distance and we just liked that like old practice of writing letters. Like, of course, we texted and I mean, we did not email, but the actual like act of like a handwritten letter just like showed this extra like love that we had for each other, or just like a more
Mhm.
like of a romantic take on wanting to share something
Yeah.
with each other.
Or it could just be like Post-it notes around the house. Not that I do that,
Yeah.
but I've
But
seen other people
how
do
about
that.
you start doing that? That's really cute.
But I've seen other people do that where you write little Post-it notes and stick them around the house, little love reminders.
Yeah. And so with the letters thing, one thing that I did to, I feel like, make it more of a practice in our relationship, and feel free to steal this because I think it's super fun and cute, is we had like special stationery, or I had like a specific
I
special
did not have
stationery
stationery.
set. He did not have stationery. I had like a special stationery set that was dedicated to like my love letters to Trey, or like any of the letters that I like wrote to Trey. And so they were all with the same stationery set, and if you've heard our love story, I think it's episode 2 or 3 or something like that, you'll know what I mean by this, but it had a shooting star on the front, so pretty cute if you ask me. And when I ran out of that stationery, I just like bought a new set of stationery. And so that's kind of been the practice that we've had, or that I've had, to make that even more special, of like, this is like a special stationery that I want to use for our love letters. And I've kept them all. So I have a cute little box where I have all our letters.
Cute little box that I bought you.
Yes, exactly. What was that for? Valentine's Day?
Or anniversary.
I think it was either Valentine's Day or anniversary. I think it was anniversary. Yeah. And so this is just an example of like a cute gift. It doesn't have to be elaborate, right?
No.
Like he went to
Like,
store and like bought a cute little box that I can actually keep all of our letters in, instead of having them scattered in my nightstand or wherever it was that I had them.
and now that we're not long distance and we're not writing letters as often as we did when we were dating,
Right.
one practice that we've kept up is we got a little Polaroid camera, and on whether it's just a day trip, like a real road trip, or a fun vacation, we'll take that with us and capture little Polaroids of those special moments.
Or we'll also just try to write letters for like important days, like birthdays and anniversaries, stuff like that. Okay, next, I feel like we need to talk about date nights. I think this is like an obvious thing. People always talk about date nights, but it's so much harder to prioritize than you think,
Way harder.
especially if you have kids, which, like we said, we don't yet, but I can only imagine how much harder it is to prioritize once you do have small children than when you don't. And even us who don't have kids yet have found it challenging at times, because you just end up letting life take over, whether it's work or travels or errands that you have, or just like the everyday of being with the same person. You forget sometimes how important and how much of an impact intentional date nights can go. And so that's piece of advice number 2, practical tip number 2, is prioritize date nights. And this can look differently for different couples, because I know it also depends on availability and time and stuff like that. So some couples prioritize one date night a week, and that's like their set, like sacred time, like no matter what happens, one date night a week. Or some couples do like once a month, and I would do no less than once a month for sure. And with that, like date nights don't have to be elaborate or expensive. Even if you have kids and you can't really leave them with anybody, you can do a date night at home after they go to bed. Or if you don't want to, go out to a fancy dinner and a movie, or go do something, that costs money, you can do a date night in your neighborhood, or, drive to a beautiful park and watch the sunset.
Even something as simple as going on a walk and just being away from your work, away from your home, away from all the to-dos, away from all the mess and cleaning that you might feel like you have to do,
Mhm.
but just getting out, having some intentional time with your spouse, and try to make it romantic. Like, try to
Mhm.
go an extra step to not just resort to, oh, let's go to dinner for date, but like,
Mhm.
let's try to make it romantic. And I know that that's something that we both have felt really loved by, when the other has actually took the effort and time to plan something, even if it's small.
Yeah.
But if there was a plan in place, it goes so much further and it makes the date so much more special.
Yeah. And even making the date itself be a surprise for the other person, I think, is a really beautiful gift in itself. I remember, and I know this because I was scrolling through our marriage post before this to kind of like refresh our memory. And there was a post where I reflected on, we had just come back from a trip. And I think it was, yeah, we came back on like a Sunday morning. And so that day I was like, okay, we came back from the trip and I just wanted to focus on like resetting, like doing our laundry and like getting ready for the next day and making sure we had groceries. And you came to me and said that you actually wanted to, go on a date. And I was like, a little bit like shocked, like, well, we have all these things to do. And you reminded me, one, not only is it Sunday and like work can wait and we can spend our Sunday, leisurely, but also you were like, I think you said something like time with each other is never wasted. And so we changed the plans and we went on a date at a brewery that we had never been to and just like talked on the patio. And I mean, we didn't come out of that date feeling stressed or sad or mad that we didn't set up for the day. And like you said, like time with each other is never wasted, and time invested in your marriage is always a good use of your time. And so even like surprise date nights or surprise like date activities like that where you don't expect it or where it's like maybe out of the ordinary or it wasn't planned in advance can be really fun and spontaneous and romantic.
And even if it's not an actual date, like taking time, especially in the evenings, to just decompress the day together, get off your screens, maybe don't watch the next episode of that TV show that night and choose to just sit on the couch together and look at each other or just talk to each other.
Mm.
I know this is something that Mari really loves and I need to get better at. But even just if you want to get into bed and just before you just go straight to sleep, but look at each other and talk to each other and
Yeah.
go over the day together, talk about your plans for the next day, talk about your hearts. But it's taking moments away from your screens, especially in the evenings, to just connect and find times. It doesn't have to be elaborate, it can be 5 minutes, but just to connect with each other.
I'm sure women everywhere are like, yes, Trey, this is exactly what I'm talking
I'm
about.
getting better. It's hard.
And obviously, I think like that's just like one of like the biggest desires on a wife's heart is just to spend intentional time connecting with her husband and literally just talking, because we know as women we could talk for hours. That's like all we really do when we hang out. And my dream, I mean, you see all these things that's like, oh, marriage is just like a sleepover with your best friend every single day. And you think back to like, what did I do on sleepovers with my friends when I was in middle school and high school? Like, we just stayed up till 2 a.m. talking.
I promise you, guys, sleepovers were not like that.
And clearly, guys' sleepovers were not like that. So that whole thing of like marriage is like a sleepover with your friend, with your best friend every day, I think is like slightly misleading because I don't know about your husband, but the second Trey gets into bed, his eyes are closed. He doesn't really last very long, just hanging out and chatting in bed. So if that works for you, where you can hang out in bed, that is so awesome. If not, know that and just like do it on the couch, like he was saying. Like choose to end your day on the couch and intentionally disconnect from screens. I think that's so important. And again, an obvious thing, but we need to hear that reminder all the time because it's such an easy go-to to just like pick up your screen while you're talking or answer a quick text while you're hanging out. And even just the fact that like maybe you could do something on your phone really quickly while you're hanging out, but like the intention of putting it away completely, maybe like putting it in another room where it's not even part of the night is a really beautiful way to love each other.
It's something that we are definitely trying to get better at.
Absolutely.
Not,
Always.
not that good at it yet.
Yes. Always trying to disconnect from screens. The last thing I was going to say is choose to feel those like special moments. I think this is also something that we've noticed in our relationship. Like Trey said at the beginning, I think in those first years of marriage, you kind of start to realize like this is great, but like it doesn't feel exactly like it was when we were dating. And like you have that newly married glow, but then at some point, I think you realize that like when you were dating, it was just this like constant butterflies, like high moment of just like I cannot believe I am in love. And then you're married and again, like, you have all these more mundane moments and that love is still there, but it's not like fireworks all the time, which is totally fine and normal and common
Good.
and good because love shouldn't be reduced to a feeling. But I think one thing that I've reflected on too is who says it can't be special? Like, who says it can't be exciting? Like, maybe taking that extra step to be like, I'm going to choose to be excited about this date, or I'm going to choose to like feel giddy when he hugs and kisses me unexpectedly. Even though, like, yeah, I get a kiss from my husband all the time. Like, that's normal. But, like, choosing to be like, oh, that's so cute and sweet. Like, I love my husband. I love when he kisses me. Like, choosing to feel those butterflies and that excitement, I think can be a way to keep things special and exciting and just to even cherish that love that you do have more and more.
Yeah, and one little side note I would add to that is don't fall into the trap or the temptation to compare the emotional state of how you feel towards each other and the number of those giddy moments toward don't compare them to the times when you were dating because
Mm,
you're in different states of life.
yeah.
And just because it didn't feel like it did when you were dating does not mean you're any less in love or any like the relationship is not as good as it was before.
Mhm.
Those comparisons can be a trap and can lead to unhappiness ultimately.
Yeah.
Like enjoy the moments with your spouse,
Yeah.
make moments special, but have peace in where you're at and don't need to compare always to.
Back to when you were
Yeah.
dating. Yeah. Okay. Next practical tip is showing interest in each other's hobbies and intentionally cultivating hobbies together or intentionally cultivating an interest in your spouse's hobby. The reason why I think this is so important and can be so helpful to strengthen your marriage is because in the end, your spouse should be your best friend. Like they truly should be. And if you think of like, how did you become best friends with your best friend growing up as a kid, right? Like you shared a lot of moments together, you had fun together. And I think fun and recreational time is super important in a marriage to continue to cultivate that friendship. And so taking an interest in each other's interests and each other's hobbies allows for you to spend more time together in fun, intentional ways, which literally leads us back to our last thing about spending intentional time together.
Yeah, I think the recreation, finding things to do together is so important. And then also, if you want to find interest in each other's interests, because then it's more fun to talk about with each other. I have two really awesome examples of how Mari has done this really, really well. And one is golf. Golf is far and away my favorite recreational activity.
Mm,
It's my biggest hobby. And Mari like would take interest in that. One, first by just learning the language and like the lingo that I would use so that then she could talk to me
yeah,
about it. And then she would ask me about how my rounds went
yeah.
and how I shot. And she would know like certain milestones or goals that I had. And she would ask about those. So then it was so much more fun to talk about it. And I like had a fun day golfing. And now I can actually share about that day with her. And she's genuinely interested in that because she cultivated an interest in that hobby.
Yeah.
But then additionally, she went a step further and is like trying to learn how to golf as well. And so now we can go out to the driving range and I can try to give some tips where I can. I'm not the best instructor, but that's a hobby now that we have that we can go out and do something together
Mhm.
that's fun out of the house. It can be a date night. It can be something that I'm so happy when I'm golfing. It's one of my favorite things to do. And now I can just share that with my wife and my best friend. It's so fun.
You're gonna make me cry.
And then a second way that
I
she's
love being
done
your
this,
best friend.
you are my best friend. And then a second way that she's done this, which is really comical, but is my love for fantasy football.
Fantasy football, ladies. It is your favorite thing now.
Yep. August hits and Mari's asking me about the draft. She's
Oh my
asking
gosh,
me
it's
about the
almost August.
players. Yes, it's coming very
It's
soon.
coming up, ladies. So start prepping yourself for fantasy football season.
And so Mari has done a great job just learning some of the concepts of fantasy football and some of the players' names. And she'll always ask, like, how our team is doing, how our team is doing. Did we win this week?
Yeah, it's our team.
It's our team for
Okay.
sure. And she'll, like learn one person's name. And so then she'll just keep asking every Sunday, like, how is Jefferson doing? How's JJ
I
doing?
can't even remember their names anymore, but yeah.
But whoever is like my stud that my team is leaning on,
I'll
she'll
remember
learn.
that.
And then
And I'll
just,
ask about him.
yeah.
And then
So,
too, I'll try and sit on the couch and watch football with you sometimes, but honestly, I think that's my struggle is I just literally don't care about watching.
yeah. But you don't
But
care
I
about
try
watching football.
but I try showing interest in other ways.
Yeah, exactly. Or you'll do things to like supplement the football watching experience and
Mhm.
enhance it, such as making snacks or offering to be a
Yes.
host. So
Yes, yes.
these are
I do
great things
love
that you can
doing
do.
that. Letting you have your friends over and I'll make fun snacks. I'm like, great. Now I can provide a space where I'm supporting his love for fantasy football, but he doesn't have to just talk to me about it or just rely on me to be there for him. Yeah. I think another thing too is just finding shared interests or shared recreational things to do together. So for us, we have a few card games that we like to play, or we love to play Settlers of Catan with other couple friends if we find people that love to play that game. But We like to find like two-person games too, so that if we just are trying to spend intentional time together without screens, like, it's honestly crazy, like, how hard it is sometimes to be like, "What do we do?" You know, when you're not, like, on your phone or watching TV or, if you already had dinner or, like, went on a walk, it's like, "What do we do?" So we picked up a few games. We play Speed, we play Nerds, Monopoly Deal, just, like, stuff like that to just have a fun, like, recreational moment together where we're just, like, enjoying a game and enjoying each other's company. Next one is a big one.
The big one, very common. You cannot avoid it, but it's conflicts. There's going to be arguments, there's going to be conflicts in every single marriage. And it's about learning how to navigate
Yeah,
those conflicts in
a healthy
a
way.
healthy way.
And I think it's truly a skill to be developed and one that many couples, us included, every couple um, faces often. And so the better you can cultivate this skill of healthy conflict, honestly, just like the happier your marriage is going to be because the less um, lasting arguments will be, the less tense moments you'll have, the more quickly you'll be able to recognize, like, okay, yeah, we had a conflict or we're having an argument right now. That's going to happen. That's normal to have a disagreement. How can we approach this in a healthy way where we're supporting each other instead of like shooting each other down and quickly move on so we can go back to being a team? So let's just share some of like the practical tips that either we've learned along the way. I know that there's one that we learned at a marriage retreat, a very like easy tip for navigating hard conversations or arguments that was really helpful for us. And then just maybe like other things that we've learned that have helped
Yeah.
us kind of manage conflict in a good way.
Yeah. I think the first one that I lean on and that we've seen really help us with these conflicts is be quick to apologize.
Mm.
And even if you don't see any fault in yourself, you can still apologize for how the other person received it. Because even though I might think I didn't actually hurt Mari, if she's hurt, and I can apologize for that, even if I don't think anything that I did was wrong.
Mhm.
So you can apologize for the things that you did do wrong and be quick to apologize, but then also like be open and willing to apologize for things that you might not even think you did wrong, but recognizing that it did hurt your spouse. And so being quick to apologize. And
Mhm.
then on the flip side, being the recipient of that apology, like being quick to forgive. And that
Yeah.
oftentimes both are hard, both are
Both
very
are
hard,
very hard.
but like actually saying the words, I forgive you. And when you say that, mean it and not have lingering resentment
Yeah.
and not to be keeping score,
Yes.
but to be quick to apologize and to be quick to forgive
Yeah.
are by far and away, I think, the ones that I've seen us have the most, that have benefited us the most.
Yeah, and like you said, like being really like earnest in that and saying the words, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
Like,
really important.
please forgive me. And saying the words, I forgive you. You know, not just it's okay or it's fine, but like, I
Hmm.
forgive you. I think that's gone a long way
Yeah.
for us and shows just like the genuineness, if that's a word, the genuinity,
Genuine.
genuineness of the apology or the forgiveness. And I think for some people, one is easier than the other. Like Trey, for example, has set a beautiful example for me. To him, apologizing comes really easily, and you do like tend to uh, acknowledge your fault, or even if you don't acknowledge it right away, just apologize because, like you said, you notice that whatever happened, somehow I ended up hurt, and
Mhm.
so you're really quick to apologize, which I've continued to just admire and try and learn from and grow from, and I think that that's helped us to first of all bring down the level of like drama to to the argument or to the conflict because I think when you face the argument with defensiveness, it's only going to escalate and feelings are only going to continue to be hurt. And so, starting with an apology brings down kind of this defensiveness level on the other end, I feel like, and
Mhm.
just kind of shows from the beginning, like, I love you. I don't want to hurt you.
Yeah. And I think as hard as it is in those moments of disagreement or those moments of conflict, recognizing that you are on the same team and that you each love each other and that you're not trying to hurt the other person,
Mm.
but it can be hard and it takes a lot of humility, but just like having that in the forefront of your mind that we are on the same team ultimately.
Yes, this is huge. I think this is like one of our top pieces of advice for couples, especially navigating conflict, is sometimes it's helpful to verbalize and like remind each other, like, I'm on your team, like, we're on the same team. I think it's easy to think, like, oh, I'm just going to assume the best of this person. And hopefully you do, but actually verbalizing that and reminding them, like, hey, no matter like what we're arguing about, like, I want you to know, like, I'm on your team. Like, I hate fighting with you. I don't want
Yes.
to hurt you. Like, say these words like, I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you. Like, remember that I love you and like I'm on your team. Like, I want to work with you to move forward and not against you.
Yeah, it's easy, especially if you both are on the defensive, to just have that attitude and that
Mm-hmm.
mindset of me versus you, who's right. But like you said, just verbalizing, I don't want to be fighting. Like 9 times out of 10, neither of the person wants to be fighting.
Yeah,
Like you
exactly.
don't want to be fighting, you're on the same team, then that's very disarming and uh, allows for the rest of the conversation and conflict to resolve in a much more mature, peaceful,
And effective way.
effective
I
way.
think, like you were saying, I think that especially helps when you are like in disagreement about something, not just like, oh, I hurt you, you hurt me, but like when you actually disagree with something and have different viewpoints, it can be so easy to be like, we are literally against each other. But the
Mhm.
truth is, you are a team. And so when you verbalize that and take this argument head on from that perspective, now you're working together to solve a problem, not necessarily working together to like squash the other person and let your thought reign over the
Mhm.
others. And so while you may still be on separate sides in like what your opinion is or what your thought is and whatever it is that you're arguing, you're able to verbalize like, oh, this is frustrating that like we're on separate sides, but like we want to work together as a team to get to a compromise or a conclusion. The next thing I would say that's really helpful is active listening and actually making the other person feel heard. So, on the one end, it's just like take your turn to speak. This is something I've had to learn as well. Like, I have so many thoughts, so I just like want to interject, but learning to wait your turn. This is like basic stuff, you guys. Like,
Like,
I
don't
hope.
interrupt.
I hope this is like not the first time you've ever heard it, right? It's like basic stuff that we need to remind ourselves, myself included, of like, take time to listen to the other person. Why are they feeling the way that they're feeling? What is it that actually hurt them? Or why do they have this perspective that might be different than yours? And then patiently wait and then share yours. And actually, a practical tip that we learned at a marriage retreat was to repeat back to the person what you feel like they heard or how they said that they felt. And so, first, you hear them out and you don't interrupt. And then you say, okay, if I'm understanding correctly, what I heard is you feel this and this and this because this and this. Like, you just kind of repeat back to them what they said. And what that does is, one, it makes the other person feel heard
Yeah,
and cared for.
which is huge in an argument
Hmm.
because the flip side of that is just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Each person constantly
And you're not getting
interrupting,
anywhere.
and neither person feels heard or understood, and the hole's just getting deeper.
Exactly. But when you do this tip, right, you on one side you feel like loved and cared for because like, okay, you actually understood what I was saying and now I know like you understand why I feel this way or why I feel hurt or where I'm coming from.
And if you feel understood, then you'll be much more open to receiving whatever it is the other person
Yeah.
has to say about that
Yes.
because you at least know, well, they understood what I was feeling and what I was coming from.
Mhm. And then I think too, the second benefit to that is that it actually helps you understand more deeply where your spouse is coming from. Like literally just repeating back your understanding can allow for clarification from your spouse in case you didn't fully understand. And it'll just reiterate what the true feelings of your spouse are. Because in arguments, it's very easy to just be like, well, you feel like this, or well, you said this. And the other person's like, that's literally not what I meant at all. And it can just get super frustrating to keep missing each other in what you're feeling and what your experience is. So repeating back to them what you feel like they heard kind of puts you on the same playing field of like, okay, we're saying the same thing, we're communicating the same thing. We can both work from this playing field instead of like, you said, I said, you said, I said.
Then the other person will go. So if I just shared what hurt me and all
Mhm.
my feelings and thoughts. And Mari patiently sat there without interrupting and then repeated back to me what she understood me to say. Then you'll flip. And
And I'll share where I'm coming from, and then Trey will repeat back to me like, "Here's what I feel like you're saying." And we've just experienced in our own conflicts and arguments that has, like Trey said, that kind of like disarmed us and brought just a more peaceful way of working through things, and honestly, like helped us to move through arguments quicker
a
because
lot quicker.
that embodies this whole idea of we're a team. That
Yeah.
embodies the whole idea of like we're working together to try and love each other, to try and go back to being happy BFFs.
And now that we're saying this, I'm like, we need to do this more often.
I know, right? I think we did it a lot after that marriage
Hmm.
retreat, which, by the way, the marriage retreat is the JP2 Healing Center's unveiled marriage retreat. It was phenomenal.
Incredible.
They had it here in Colorado in the fall, and I remember I heard about it, and I've heard about JP2 Healing Center, so I was like, these retreats are amazing. And I remember us being like, well, like, we've been only married for 2 years. Like, should we really go? Like, what are we gonna learn? Like, we're in love, which is very
We don't
naive of
have
us.
any problems. We do have problems.
Which is very naive of us, and we walked in, and it was beautiful to see just the vast age range. There were people who were literally just married, the month before, to people who've been married for 60 plus years,
Yeah.
and we all got something out of that retreat, and so taking that intentional time away to work through our marriage, to work through things that are difficult for us, to show to show our love to the other person. We came out so strong, obviously, like more in love and just like walking away too with like really intentional things to talk about in the future to work on to love each other better. It's not
And
like we walked away with all of our problems solved, but it was like now I actually have tools to
mhm.
work through these things that we haven't fully worked through yet.
So highly, highly recommend looking them up and going on a retreat.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap up this episode, we just want to share 5 agreements that we feel like we have held to throughout our 3 years of marriage that have really strengthened our marriage. And they're just simple things that we do on a day-to-day basis, that show each other that we love each other and that really help us to work as a team.
And the first one is to pray together every day.
Mm.
This goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of this podcast, to put first things first, to have a marriage that's grounded in faith and to be centered on God. We need to be praying together every day. So
Yeah.
what that looks like for us is really simple. It's not complicated whatsoever. Before we go to sleep every night, one of us, usually we take turns, we'll just pray. We'll just pray for the things we're grateful for, the things we're interceding for other people, for friends, family, for things people have asked us to pray about, for hopes and desires and dreams that we have, or any things that we're suffering or struggling with. And we just give it all to the Lord before we close our eyes.
Yeah, I think back to what you were saying of like that first thing we talked about of God-centered marriage is really like approaching your whole vocation from the standpoint of like God first, then your spouse. You need to invite God into your marriage for there to be a God-centered marriage. It's not just about like you having your personal relationship with
Mhm.
God. It's through that personal relationship with God, you have a yearning to bring God into then your personal relationship with your spouse because you are now one. And so inviting the Lord into your relationship is one of the first and primary ways that you'll have a God-centered relationship. And so, like Trey said, we do this by praying together. There's many different ways to do that. The way that we do that, Trey just shared, and it can be very quick. Some nights we're exhausted and it's like a 2-3 minute prayer. Some night we're able to elaborate more and we, pray for the intentions of the people that we love, and are able to kind of spend more time in prayer. And sometimes if we have more time and we want to, we'll even like sit down and have a more intentional time of prayer with scripture or something like that, where we're praying with each other for a specific intention, or we're studying scripture or doing kind of like a Lectio Divina together. And that can be a really beautiful way too, to spend time in prayer and growing in your faith with your spouse. But it can really be truly as simple as taking a little bit of time every night before bed to thank the Lord for the day, to thank the Lord for your marriage, and to ask for any intentions that you have. Our second agreement is we never speak ill of each other. So, this is something you might see it on Instagram a lot. There's like this whole culture of like bashing on your spouse or like complaining about your spouse with, your wife friends or your husband friends. it can be really easy to just get together with a bunch of wives and just be like, "Oh my gosh, my husband does this and this and this," and just complain about all the things your husband does wrong or all the ways that you wish your husband was better. Or for husbands to get together and be like, "Oh my gosh, my wife is so annoying. She does this and this," and just complain.
Mhm.
And that needs to stop. Like, that's just like number one way to kill your marriage is to speak ill of the person that is, that God has given you to love you, to give their life to you, to get you to heaven. And so that's for sure an agreement we've always had is we never speak about each other behind each other's backs, or, we don't really vent to other friends about each other. It's just like you uphold your spouse with the most respect that you would.
Yeah. And we're going to continue to do this when we have kids and not speak ill of each other to our kids or not
Hmm.
say, oh, like your mom is so blah, 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 or like complain about something that your spouse might have done to your
Hmm.
kids. But always hold your spouse with like on a pedestal and like
Yeah.
on like with the highest praise and always speak very kindly and lovingly
Hmm.
about your spouse.
Yeah. And always working to build your spouse up, like
Mhm.
in your relationship, but also in the way that your spouse is perceived.
And the third agreement that we have is to start and end our days together. This is something that we've always done. We've always gone up to bed together at the same time, and we've always tried to wake up together at the same time. It's very simple,
Hmm.
but it always starts and ends our days on a good note together.
Hmm.
Provides time for prayer for either in the morning or in the evening.
Hmm. I think it also just like provides a greater sense of unity. And I know that this can be difficult for some couples, and
Or
it's
not feasible for
or
some
not feasible.
couples.
Yeah, it's not.
Mhm.
We're not saying that this is something that every couple should do. This is just an agreement that we've had in our marriage because we are able to, and we've seen the value, and we desire to start and end our day together. Like I said, I feel like it just promotes a greater unity within the couple to like take the day on together. And at least for me, like marriage is such a gift, right, to all of us. But for me, like it's one of my favorite times of the day, ending our day together and knowing like, wow, like the gift of my spouse, like I get to go to bed with him every single night and I get to wake up next to the love of my life every single day. And it's just a moment where I get to give thanks to the Lord, like for my husband, or wake up in gratitude and love for my husband. And we get to tackle the day together. As well as Trey said, it provides a time for you to actually set time aside together to be in prayer together, if you choose to at the end of every night. We feel like that's the most practical way to do
Yeah.
it.
And like we said, this is possible for us, but it's not feasible for everybody. So it's not like a hard and fast rule, but if you can do it, it's worked for us.
Yeah, and I would challenge you to do it. I think a lot of the times we think it's not feasible, and maybe your work literally doesn't allow you to, and you have to be out of the house by 5 a.m. But I would challenge you, if you feel like you want greater unity or greater connection in your marriage, this is a really beautiful way to get that. I think a lot of times what I hear is, oh, like, this person's just a night owl. Like my spouse is just a night owl. And so it's hard for them to wake up early because they're up really late. Or, this person like likes to get up super early to do things and whatever. So it's maybe like finding a compromise or a happy medium. Or maybe you have like certain days where you try to do something together in the morning, like have breakfast together or something like that. But just challenge you to find those moments of greater unity. I would say one thing with that too is like sex is really important in a marriage, and if you're not going to bed at the same time, it's probably harder to get to that. And so going to bed at the same time, again, promotes greater unity and time for you to connect with your spouse and enter into the sacrament of marriage. Fourth agreement is honesty is the best policy. And this just means that, like, at all times, the policy we have is literally just to say what you really feel. Like, we don't play games with each other. We don't try and like not actually say how we feel and see if they can figure out how we feel. Like we try and just literally be like, if something bothered you in that moment and it makes sense to share it, like just share that. Or if you are like, feeling a certain way, just being honest and sharing why you feel that way with obviously with respect, but without reservation or holding back.
hmm This is great because a lot of times during moments of conflict, all these things bubble up. And it could
Hmm.
be like weeks and weeks and weeks or months of things that bothered you and resentments or problems that you just have kept in that then make these arguments or moments of conflict way worse. And so, something that we've tried to do is, like Mari just said, is share how you're feeling in those times, because then it'll also be it'll be received much better, because the person isn't already emotionally like charged with the heat of the argument. So they'll be able to receive that comment that you might have had about how something that what they did made you feel, or something that you wish that they would do better. And so, yeah, honesty is the best policy.
Yeah. And think even too beyond conflicts, it just allows you to know the heart of your spouse more, of just being honest with like, if you're not doing okay, share why. Or I don't know, I'm trying to think of other things besides just like what bothered you or conflicts, but just in general, like not,
It could be like even just sharing, hey, when you did that, that made me feel really loved.
yeah.
Like that made me feel really good. I really like when you do this.
Yeah, it's almost like unguarding your heart. I think like we're so used to guarding our hearts with people, or like protecting like how we say things in order to not upset people, or like not be vulnerable, or like not open that can of worms. But like your spouse is like the most intimate relationship that you will have and should have. And so being open and vulnerable and honest about whatever it is you're experiencing in your life or how you're feeling will strengthen your connection with your spouse and allow them to learn how to love you better when they know truly like what's in your heart.
And the fifth and last agreement is love languages. We've already talked a lot about this,
This is
but
full circle moment.
it simply go figure out what your love language is. There's a book about it. You can read that if you want.
There's a test you can take online.
So find your love languages, find your spouse's love language, and then try to love your spouse in their love language.
Truly make the effort to do that.
And that's it.
And that's it, you guys.
Those are our last 5 agreements.
Yes.
We hope that this episode was beneficial, that you got something out of it. Again, we're newlyweds, and this is just from our experience.
Yeah. And I want to hear from you guys as well. We're going to be sharing, clips of this on the Everbe podcast. If you don't already follow the Everbe podcast account, it's at Everbe Podcast. Please, if you are a wife, or maybe even like a seasoned wife or a new wife, drop your ideas in the comments as well. I want to know your thoughts. How are you working on your marriage and improving your marriage? We love to learn from other couples as well. We think it's so beneficial to hear from other couples' experiences of how they're growing in their marriage, how they're putting God at the center of their marriage. So we want to hear from you guys as well.
We are always trying to get better.
Always learning.
We're nowhere near perfect, and we struggle a lot. So
yeah, and know that we're praying for you guys in your vocation of marriage. Thank you so much for listening in. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and on social media, and give me a 5-star rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. That helps me and the show out so much. Also, make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at Everbe Podcast. And if you want more content like this and you don't already follow me, you can also follow me on Instagram at mari.c.wagner. And may his praise ever be on our lips. God bless.